it's an inevitable. Can't think of the word I was looking for. For some reason, crisis is coming to mind, but that's not correct. But
listen, with I Feel You Linger in the Air, it does feel like a crisis that some of those arcs were cut out.
Yeah.
Hey guys, welcome to LoveCast, the BL podcast. I'm your host, Kayla, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Alexa.
Hello.
So today we are going to be talking about BL Novel 2 series adaptations. And this is a topic that I cannot believe we have not covered before in all the years we've been doing this podcast. Like, it's just crazy. I think maybe in a sense, like, I wasn't reading a lot of the novels in the beginning, and I think a lot of them weren't being translated in the beginning, or it was like an unofficial translation. So it's kind of like an accessibility thing. They're more accessible now.
Yeah, I know we've definitely talked about it in the past, but I feel like when we've talked about it in the past, we talked about discussing like specifically like mangas and manhwas. And I, even still doing this now, personally do not read a lot of manga and manhwa. My perspective, and I think Kayla's as well, is going to be coming more from like the Thai BL novel side of things. But we did have a correspondent who kind of gave us some information on like the manga manhwa side of things, since Pixie's not here today and she's like our resident manga reader. So yeah, like in the past we've talked about it, I was like, I wouldn't really have anything to contribute. And I also just wasn't reading a lot in general up until like last year. And funnily enough, it was like kind of Thai BL novels that kind of like restarted my love of reading. So I feel like now I can actually like contribute to the conversation more.
I had this same exact experience where last year I started reading the Thai novels and I was like, wait, why did I stop reading? Like, I love reading. Yeah. So yeah, I had literally the same exact thing happen. But yeah, I thought it would also be fun to talk about some of the adaptations or novels that we've read and adaptations that we'd liked. Maybe some that we were indifferent about, maybe some we didn't like. Who knows? Like Alexa said, originally we were kind of looking at this from a Thai BL perspective, but this does include manhwa, danmei, and webcomics. Anything that has an adaptation and is BL. What makes a good series adaptation? I think there are a couple things. For me, the biggest one is always when the series adaptation maintains the heart of the story, like the real core of the story. So like they still include those important themes, the character arcs, the plot points, and like the emotions that make up that original material. Yeah, that's just like the first and foremost thing that I think everybody hopes for when their favorite novel gets adapted.
No, 100%. I'm always like, for me, and we'll talk about this a little bit more with some of the other points. Like, I'm okay with certain elements changing. I'm okay with certain plots changing, things like that, as they need to be adapted to TV. But if the heart of the story and the heart of the characters and the heart of like the plot and emotions is not there, or is there, I should say, then to me, that's like what really will connect the novel and the adaptation and really make it feel like it's true to the novel. Like, I'm really about the heart of the story being the biggest factor for when I'm reading a novel or watching the adaptation of a novel, I guess.
I put as an example to this whenever, well, you know how some shows, Pixie has talked about this a lot, is that a lot of shows these days will tell you exactly what you're supposed to get from something or exactly what's going on instead of showing it. So I kind of put that as an example, like whenever they explain lore through visuals and dialogue, but not like telling you straight out what is happening. I consider that something that keeps like the heart of the story.
And it's surprisingly difficult to do because I think, you know, a lot of novels are like the inner monologue of a character. So it's not always easy to transfer those inner monologues to screen in a way that's not just like the character talking at you or, you know, a straight up voiceover all the time, which some shows do utilize that. But yeah, it is harder to do than it seems. So it feels really significant when they do a good job of like transferring those elements without making it super obvious.
And so I think another big thing that's important with adaptations, and we noticed this specifically with, I think, the Thai BL novel adaptations, is that because a lot of them were written years and years and years ago, they're not the most politically correct, so to speak. So, one thing that a lot of adaptations will do is alter certain details to fit the current social climate. I think pretty much every novel has to do this. Like, I can't think of one that hasn't done this in some
Yeah.
way. And you also, like, think about just in general, like, what is appropriate for broadcast, even just from, like, a rules and regulations perspective.
Yeah, it's like, and I think, once again, I think this is something like Pixie has talked about a lot, because Pixie is like a big dark romance fan. And, you know, she has talked about that a lot, how like reading something feels a lot different than like even just watching people portray it on screen. That they're two different mediums. So I think, you know, what is suitable to each medium is going to change. So, you know, you might be okay reading a character doing something, or something dark or really twisted happening to a character might read okay, but not necessarily transfer to the screen. And then there is also the element of a lot of these novels are really old. They were written 10 to 15 years ago, and the way people viewed BL as a genre, viewed the queer community, just the things that people were okay saying and doing 10 to 15 years ago are different no matter where you are. So yeah, if you're, you know, taking a novel from 2015 and adapting it in 2025, then like inevitably things have to change to reflect the series existing in the year 2025.
Yeah, a lot of the Thai BL novels, I think they pull directly from the Japanese yaoi tropes. You know how that goes, the traditional yaoi tropes. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But again, it's like, it's really hard to depict some of those things on screen without it feeling like you're either maybe romanticizing something that you don't want to, or you're making a mockery of someone or something. So it's really difficult. Honestly, adapting stuff is really difficult. And I did have an example for this one, The Interminable novel. I read it. I loved it. But I was very intrigued by the fact that it starts off with a warning message, or like a disclaimer message from the author. So I guess she actually rewrote the novel in its entirety almost. And she ended up apologizing because the original story had this really strange grooming plotline, which actually there is still a special chapter at the end that includes it, but it's like not part of the story. I have insight into what it was. It's so weird. It's like set in a present day, like even more present than where the story ends. And it's that the one character like watches the other one grow up from like the age of 8 or something, and then like pursues them, which I was like, yep,
Interesting.
yep, good thing you took that out, because it isn't even relevant to anything. Like, that's not even part of anything. In the warning, I guess, the author was like, I was really young when I wrote this. I wasn't really like socially conscious, or like realized that what I was writing had like a certain impact or something. So
I think I have seen that I can't think of specific ones right now, but I've definitely seen those warnings before. And so I think especially when a lot of these novels, like they're getting, at least for the English translations, they are happening once the series gets like picked up for television. And so the author is like getting a chance to like put this author's note into the English translation. And I don't know if they exist in the Thai versions, but I've seen a lot of them at the beginning of English translations of novels, where they're like, a lot of the stuff that is written here is suited to, you know, 2015 or whatever when this novel is written, but it doesn't necessarily reflect the series or what I feel about these things now. And I don't know if there's ever been cases of the ones where I've read that the author has like talked about actually changing this stuff, but they have like had those kind of things at the beginning where they acknowledge them. So I do see those pretty often, not like all the time, but I've seen a couple of them when I've gone to like start a novel. So
another thing that I think is pretty self-explanatory when you're adapting a novel, webtoon, etc. to a series is that you have to omit anything that's just unnecessary, because at the end of the day, the goal is to make an entertaining TV show or film. So I think of like shows that, well, I guess that would be in the novel, there are side plots or secondary characters maybe that aren't really necessary as much to the story. Maybe don't allot them as much time when you adapt it into a series, because you always have to think of that runtime for the episode. We see directors all the time be like, yeah, we had to cut this out, we had to cut that out, unfortunately, because just the runtime of the episode, we had to keep it down.
Yeah, and they're adapting, you know, something that's hundreds of pages down to most of the time 10 to 12 episodes. So, and I actually have in the next point we're going to talk about, like kind of an opposite thing. So I think it goes both ways, but there are a lot of these novels, like I think about I Feel You Linger in the Air had to cut out entire arcs of, which in my case, I wish they would have been able to do them. Like, there's just so much. Some of these novels are so long, and, you know, you're getting 10 to 12 episodes of an hour, if you're lucky, sometimes a little bit more. So, yeah, there's inevitable, like, side characters or special. That's why, like, shows do special episodes down the line where they can pull more of those stories or more of those, like, characters that people were looking for. So, it's an inevitable. I can't think of the word I was looking for. For some reason, crisis is coming to mind, but that's not correct. But
listen, with I Feel You Linger in the Air, it does feel like a crisis that some of those arcs were cut out.
Yeah.
Once again, another episode where we do not fail to mention I Feel You Linger in the Air.
This is a valid one to mention it in, and we'll talk about it more later, too. So,
did you want to get into the next point about creative liberties?
It's another thing where, like, just like the mediums are different. So I think sometimes it's good to take liberties to enhance the story or the characters and just make it work for the medium that you're writing for, that you're producing for. And I think, you know, even if a show is coming from a novel as a source material or a manga as a source material, the people who are producing it, you know, are still making it their own story in a way. So it makes sense that they, you know, want to bring their own vision into it. And, you know, they're interpreting the novel's words the same way the audience interprets the novel's words. Like, we're all interpreting things, and those interpretations might be different. And they also might be different than what the author had in mind when they wrote the novel. So I think it's only natural that a story maybe changes or adjusts a little bit when someone else is bringing that story to life. You know, that's why different adaptations of things change over time. And also kind of like to go to the opposite point of sometimes shows omitting things that are unnecessary. There's also like a lot of these novels are very short and very straightforward. So sometimes things need to be added in to fit a 10 to 12 episode arc. Director Kla, when talking about Duong with You, said that like if they had just adapted straight from the novel, it probably would have been like a 6-episode series. So inevitably they are having to, you know, add some things in, add some plot lines, add some additional characters, or integrate elements of other stories, like, you know, because a lot of these novels have like multiple novels in the same universe. Like North and Otto's characters in Duong with You have their own novel where a lot of their story happens, but we are now seeing that kind of integrated into Duong with You. And so I think, you know, they have to adjust and add things in some elements to make it fit the runtime. Other times they have to like take things out to make it fit the runtime. It's really, I guess, just about finding like that perfect balance for the particular novel that you're adapting, and whether that means adding things in or taking things out.
I think it's really impressive whenever they combine multiple novels into one series. They did that with Heated Rivalry, right?
Yeah, because Scott and Kip, technically, their story is like its own novel, and they kind of took the important elements of that to bring it into Heated Rivalry.
On the other hand, what do we think makes a bad series adaptation? Of course, this like bad, that term in general is going to be subjective. But I think the big thing is when the adaptation strays a bit too far from the major themes, character arcs, plot points, emotions, all of that from the original source material. And the big example I thought of for this one is I'm the Most Beautiful Count, which, you know, I watched that show not having really any knowledge of the webtoon. I know what people had to say about it. I saw the critiques, but even just like me watching it as a person, I was like, there feels like there's something weird going on here. There feels like there's something missing. Basically, Change infamously removed the political elements of the original webtoon, which the fans and the author both pushed back on. I believe it was in their behind the scenes commentary video about the series where they actually said that they weren't going to focus as much on the politics of things, and they were going to try to, I guess, like lighten the story, lighten the mood. But the author even created a thread when the first episode came out and went like scene by scene critiquing it. Like she was not having it. She critiqued every single scene of that episode. But another big critique the fans had was the casting of the series. This was a really big thing because in the novel, the character Kolsal, he has a tan complexion, and it's like a very big part of the story because he faces colorism for it. Like, people look down on him because of his skin tone. And then you have Ping, who people don't think that he closely resembles that. I guess that he is paler skinned than, I don't think he's super pale personally, but he still doesn't fit the image of the character of Kosal that the fans envisioned. It's just crazy how like big the backlash from this was, to the point where I feel like it really affected how well or not so well the series did.
I mean, it was huge. And I think a lot of it came from obviously the author herself, but I think a lot of Thai people who had read the webtoon or the webcomic and felt very connected to it, also kind of pushed back against it as well. And I feel like, unfortunately, like the series not having as much of a Thai audience really impacted it. Because, you know, there were definitely international fans who were watching it. Obviously, Kayla watched it. We did the interview for it. But there was notably like not as much of like a buzz around that show, and I think that it was really the impact of the author kind of pushing back against things, the Thai audience kind of pushing back against things, and subsequently like not really tuning into the show. I think the impact was very, very visible when you were watching the show and watching it go by weekly.
I had looked into this a little as well, because I guess in the beginning I wanted to know if like the critiques were valid, because I just didn't know anything about the webtoon. But I thought it was interesting that people were mentioning that the romance between the characters is a subplot in the webtoon. Like, it's not the focus of the story, and it really is the political commentary that's the focus. That made me look at the whole series in a different perspective as well. It wasn't just like, oh, I think this series like wasn't really for me. It kind of made me feel like, okay, why did they choose to do it this way then? Is it because the government was technically a sponsor? Like, the Cultural Trust was a sponsor of the show? Is that why?
Yeah, it's a really interesting choice to take a webcomic that is beloved for its political commentary and then get rid of that essentially, or alter that so much that they don't see that, you know, beloved aspect of it. It really goes back to if the part of this show was the politics and the political commentary, and you're not wanting to keep that in the show, then why adapt that specific webcomic? Is it because it was super popular and they thought thought that would be enough to like carry it through, I guess, and people would watch no matter what type thing? Like, it's a very interesting choice. From Change's choice to adapt that novel or webcomic and then change what they did is very, very interesting.
I think it is 100% a thing where they thought because it's popular, they could ride off that popularity. It's kind of sad. It's kind of sad, because I could envision a version of the series adaptation that does it well, but I just don't think they executed it well. So it's unfortunate. But yeah, that is the big example that I thought of when I'm thinking like, what series strayed too far from the novel? This is another one that, again, can go both ways. Some series add subplots and characters that aren't originally in the novel. One reason for this is to inflate that runtime, because you have these really short novels that you're trying to make into a series. An example of this is Head to Head. I didn't read the novel myself, but like, I know just from hearing people talk about it that there isn't a secondary couple in the novel. But in the series, they added the secondary couple, Van and Farm, and they gave them their own romance subplot. And some people thought that maybe the writing or pacing in the series suffered because they added this subplot. So maybe there wasn't as much of a focus on Jin and Jerome's story. I'm going to be honest, I did not finish Head to Head. So
me either, to be honest. I think I made it halfway through the show when like Jin and or Farm and Van hadn't really acted on their romantic feelings yet. So I didn't really get to see that portion of the story play out. I think with GMMTV specifically, and a lot of these companies that have a lot of actors, they do this to be able to put their actors in shows.
Oh yeah.
Especially with GMMTV, like they usually use a secondary couple in a series as a way to introduce new pairings, which was what they did with Surf and Java in Head to Head. So I'm sure there are other examples of novels they adapted where the secondary couple that we saw on the show probably did not exist in the original source material. They need it as a way to, like you said, inflate the runtime for these shorter novels, but also like when you have so many actors, like there's got to be a way for some of them to get work, I guess. So you might as well just make up characters and throw them in.
That is so true. They literally just put the characters in sometimes to promote a BL ship.
And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Or sometimes people really like it, but then they don't bring it back. Like they don't bring that pairing back.
I'm curious, was Bad Buddy based on a novel? Because I'm thinking of Ink and Pa as an example of when they used the BL to introduce a ship. In this instance, it was a GL, and like it went really well and was basically the start of GMMTV actually doing GL. But I don't know if it was based on a novel, and I don't know if Ink and Pa were also a romantic storyline in the novel, if it did exist. So
I'm going to be honest, the people who I thought of whenever I said that were, is it Gawain and Pod? Dark Blue Kiss.
Yeah.
That's what I thought of. Sunmork.
I mourn them every day. Yeah, the other thing that I was thinking of in terms of what makes a bad series adaptation is when they like sanitize the characters or the plot in a way that hurts the story. In my opinion, a lot of the times they do this because they don't want to make the actors look bad or the pairings look bad or specific actors look bad for playing like a bad character. Like I think when it comes to GMMTV, they tend to have a hard time making villains be villains, especially if they're using you know, one of their bigger actors. So the example I have for this is from Me and T, where overall, I mean, the series is very beloved, and I think it was a pretty good novel to series adaptation. I did read the novel, but I think about Perth's character, Tawan, who in the novel was a lot darker and more twisted and just a lot more of a bad guy than he ended up being in the series. And a lot of people think, or some people think, that they did that because they wanted to make it more justifiable for Santa's character to still choose him again at the end. And apparently there were like other factors going into, maybe they did have more plans to make him a bad guy, but Santa was injured, so they had to like adjust their runtime and things like that. But it overall, like, his character specifically and that relationship ended up coming off very like sanitized and disjointed, because it's like they almost wanted to make him a bad guy and like lean into it, but they couldn't quite do it. And so I think that's an example of like not wanting to lean fully into darker points when a story maybe needs them, or darker characters when a story maybe needs them, because though the term we use for a lot of GMM shows is Disneyfy it, and make it, you know, not as bad as it needs to be for it to work, if that makes sense.
Yes. The actual author of the novel, they seem to have a very big impact on, I guess, how the series is perceived. So like we talked about on The Most Beautiful Count already, and how the author was pretty critical of the changes that Change made.
I guess like it really depends on the adaptation. Like sometimes the authors take a more like, I don't know if positive's the right word, but are almost kind of fine to just like let the novel, you know, be taken as it is. And then there are other instances like on The Most Beautiful Count. And then the other example I was thinking of was Duong with You, where the author got into some pretty public discourse like with the show's director. You know, they were like tweeting stuff and things like that about certain elements of the adaptation that they were worried about coming from the novel. Specifically, a lot of people think that the author of the Duong with You novel is the reason why Poor TT Poor has become just TT Poor, because the author expressed concern about Poor TT Poor implying that Duong and Chin could be a switch couple. I thought this was such a weird position for her to take, because in the novel, Duong is the one who is typically topping, but they also explicitly say that it could go either way, and Chin just doesn't like to do it because he's lazy. Their friends make jokes a lot of the time about like, oh, either one of them could be the top. And that did happen in the show as well. Like they were kind of like, which one's the top? Which, you know, gets into stereotypes about who looks like a top versus who looks like a bottom, which, hey, we will be talking about that in another episode soon as well. But yeah, it was just really interesting that even though in her novel, the characters explicitly say like, I'm fine with either way, but the novel does end up being with Duong, the one who is doing the topping, even though it implies that things could be differently. The author really wanted to seemingly make sure that the series kept it so that it was Duong Chin, and that there was no implication of Chin Duong being possible. And so a lot of people think that that is a lot of the reason why TT and Poor announced their decision to just go by TT Poor a few weeks ahead of the show premiering, to kind of placate that concern that the author was showing and had expressed pretty publicly on social media and stuff like that. So that's the other example that I could think of where the author her critique seemingly influenced the final product that the show came to be. A lot of fans who are really excited about the idea of poor TT poor and having a couple that is fine to switch dynamics are, I guess, pretty resentful, understandably so, towards that decision being changed and kind of this TT poor dynamic being the final one that they've landed on, and thinking that the author is the reason for that.
Yeah, I had a big issue with this because I feel like in a circumstance like this, it's the actors who get thrown to the wolves. People blamed Domundi for this, but truthfully, they kept emphasizing that it was their decision the whole time. Even from the beginning, they were like, the company gave us freedom to do it however we wanted. Mm-hmm. So it was poor TT poor at first, but then the backlash happened. And I just I hate to say that I blame the author, but I really do blame the author for at least one of the reasons why TT and poor themselves received hate and criticism for this.
Yeah, and just the way that TT and poor, we kind of talked about this in a couple of our episodes where we addressed their whole dynamic and how the word revolutionary is not the right word, but it's it was very different than what we're used to in Thai BL. They were very the way they talked about it is you could tell they were always very aware of how the fans would take that decision. And then, when it came out that they were going to go by TT poor solely, the way that their announcements were worded were just very apologetic, and it felt like you could feel like they were taking blame for something that they really shouldn't have been. And I can't help but feeling like there was probably a lot of pressure that they were feeling to kind of try and find something to make everyone happy. And unfortunately, I think they were in a situation where it was impossible for everyone to be happy, because no matter what, someone's going to be upset that it's not poor TT or poor TT poor, or, so they were really in a situation where no one could be happy. And it does suck that these young actors really took the brunt of all of that drama.
It was also interesting to see the fans of the novel kind of feuding with the fans of TT and poor.
Mm-hmm.
Some people really, really care about, I think, what the authors have to say about their adaptations. They really value it. And I understand that.
Talking about heated rivalry again, we talked about this, I think, in our deep dive of or maybe I'm thinking about the interviews where they discuss when you're adapting a novel that already has a core audience, there inevitably are going to be people of that core audience that are not going to be happy. I think I'm specifically thinking of maybe something Hudson said or Connor said, where someone's going to hate that you were cast as this character, or someone's going to hate that you don't look specifically this way. So that is always a factor when adapting a novel, is that the novel itself, especially a lot of these Thai novels, the ones they often choose to adapt are very popular and famous, within BL novel reading communities. Mm-hmm. They're bringing a big fan base. That's why they choose to adapt them, because they're popular IPs and they want that base fan base. But then you have to worry about keeping that base fan base happy while also keeping the fans of the couple that are adapting that novel happy. So yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy to exist in, I guess.
Did you want to talk about Salmon's novels?
Yeah, I think Salmon is an interesting example because she has always seemingly been an example of an author who has very positive feelings around her novels' adaptations. She's always credited as the original creator. From what I could find, I don't think she screen wrote for any of her specific novels that were adapted. We did an interview with her way back when, and she talked about consulting for all of them, specifically for the medical aspects, since a lot of her novels are based on her experience as a doctor and incorporate medical elements into them. And she's always been a huge champion of her adaptations. She's always hyping them up, and she's even gone on to screenwrite for other series like Petrichor and 4 Minutes and Dead Friend Forever. So I think she's an example of an author that has kind of wholeheartedly embraced, I guess, the adaptations of her novels. And I think that does also influence people feeling better about those adaptations as well. I know Spare Me Your Mercy is one of her adaptations that the TV adaptation got some criticism in terms of the writing and not fully encompassing the story, but it still seems like Salmon, as the author, has always kind of really championed the adaptations of her shows. And I think she was a when I was thinking of someone who's really positive on the author side, like she was one of the first examples that came to mind as someone who's very involved in those adaptations and also very like excited for them, I guess, excited about them, if that makes sense.
I always think it's really cool whenever the author is working closely with the production. I feel like more confident that things are going to turn out well, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Which I didn't know that Violet Rain is going to be involved in the Love of Asylum production.
Yeah, she screenwrote the show, as well as
wow.
being the author of the novel. So I can't think of any other examples where, I'm sure they exist, where the author also screenwrites the show. But yeah, she was a screenwriter for the show and then also wrote the novel that the show is being adapted from. So that's another one that I did read. And Violet Rainey is also the author of I Feel You Linger in the Air. So I'm very confident in her writing skills. But I don't think she wrote for I Feel You Linger in the Air. And I don't think she wrote for Hidden Moon, which is the other novel of hers that was adapted. But for Love of Asylum, she is taking on the role of both the novel author and also the screenwriter. I don't know if she's the only screenwriter, but she is one of the screenwriters for the TV series as well. So makes me very excited to see how that project is going to come out, having like the novel author on as the screenwriter as well. So
I'm a fan of Violet Rain. I really love her writing. I think you pronounce her name Prung. She's the author of Two Worlds, which is the MaxNat one. She had something really interesting to say about the series adaptation of Two Worlds, something that I've never seen another author say. So I was really interested by this. But she basically was like, you know, she said that she could really feel the team's passion that they put into the show. She really loved like all the settings that they chose. She loved the casting. She thought the acting was great. And just like overall, she was very impressed. However, she suggested that maybe they should have taken more creative liberties and strayed a little farther from just like following word for word what her novel says, what happens in her novel.
Interesting.
She said in a tweet, 30 to 40% of her novel's content could have been cut from the show. Wow. I've never heard an author be like, you guys could have put less of my novel in the show. But her reasoning was that she wanted there to be more of a focus on the characters' emotions so that you could understand their actions better. So there were some moments she pointed out in the show where she was like, this was pretty good, but I think we could have delved deeper into it. I think they could have shown like more emotion, like more time could have been dedicated to this. The secondary characters, she kind of wished that more time was dedicated to them in the show and building up like their characters, their romances. So while she did feel like positively overall about it, had a lot of good things to say about like the team and the cast, I did think it was so interesting that she was like, literally, she was like, you guys could have taken a bit more creative liberty from my original work.
Yeah, that is not something I've ever heard of before. I feel like it really speaks to someone who understands the differences in like writing versus TV production and can kind of see and respect where those changes need to be made in order to make something work for TV. So I think it's a really cool perspective for an author to have, honestly. But
I do get it though. Like there were some moments where I guess I wanted the emotional scenes to be elongated a little bit. But it did feel like sometimes it was like cut abruptly and they would move on to the next thing. Like the transition itself would be really abrupt. So I get what she means with like focusing more on the characters, or I guess the actors portraying the emotions of the characters so that you can, I guess, get a better understanding of where the characters are coming from. I think we can get into some of the BL novels that we have read. For me, I have read Cutie Pie. I am going to read Naughty Babe because rereading Cutie Pie again made me want to read Naughty Babe. I read the Bedfriend novel. Of course, I Feel You Linger in the Air. I read The Next Prince, Chemjira, Interminable, and most recently, Love Upon a Time.
Yeah, we definitely have some overlap. I, of course, have also, actually it was very recent, and I will talk about that more, that I read the I Feel You Linger in the Air novel, Chemjira, Love Upon a Time, The Next Prince. We have all those in common. I've read the Dawn with You novel, like I've mentioned, Me and T. The Cards Tell Me It's You, which is the novel My Magic Prophecy was based on. I have read a couple volumes of like Japanese manga that have been adapted, like volume 1 of Cherry Magic and volume 1 of I Hear the Sunspot. And then I've read a couple adaptations or novels for shows that are being adapted but aren't released yet, like Unknown Lover, Your Tuber, Love Asylum, which is coming soon, Billionaire Biker, and I'm currently reading the 21 Let's Fall in Love novel, which is the Junior Mark series that's coming out of the most recent GMMTV showcase. So TBL novels have really kept me going for the last year or so. So I've been powering through like as many as I can find English translations for, honestly.
I thought that I was reading a lot, but you are reading a lot. As you can tell, we have been focusing a lot on the TBL novels. We really wanted Pixie here for this episode because she has read Semantic Error and she has, I know, a lot of thoughts about the adaptation of it. I'll get into some general thoughts I remember people having about it later, but yeah. So all we had written down for her was Semantic Error because we couldn't actually remember what else she's read.
I know she's read some of the Danmai have been adapted as well, but I just don't know which specific ones. I was like, Semantic Error is the only one I know for a fact that she has read because that's like one of her favorite BLs and she's talked a lot about the adaptation and everything. So yeah, she was really supposed to be like our resident non-Thai BL correspondent here, but she's not feeling well today. So Kayla and I can really only give our own perspective. But yeah, we'll give some thoughts that we've obtained from another correspondent for some of the other non-Thai adaptations. So
yeah, so I thought that it would be fun, maybe, if we talked about some of the things we maybe liked and disliked about the novel to series adaptations that we are familiar with. My first one is, of course, I Feel You Linger in the Air. And I think Alexa and I have the exact same thoughts on this. But this is by far my favorite BL novel. I think it's the most beautifully written one. The language is so poetic. I love the amount of detail that they put into it because it is historical. So there's a lot of history, understandably. There's a lot of lore in terms of superstitions with the alternate dimensions, stuff like that. Something I really like that a lot of Thai novels do is they'll put little asterisks and then they'll explain things to you. Obviously love the novel. I thought the series was a great adaptation. Literally the only thing I wish is that there was a second season of I Feel You Linger in the Air so that they could go into the second half of the novel, because there is a whole second half of the novel that they touch upon it a little bit with Commander
You get
Yai,
the tiniest hint. Yeah.
But that is such a good story too, and I really wish that it would have been told in visual format. But that is literally the only critique I have.
I put off reading the I Feel You Linger in the Air novel for a long time. Like, I bought the novel back in 2023 when the series was airing, and I only read it last year. But it was kind of like this thing of like, I wanted to put off reading it because I wanted to still have something left of I Feel You Linger in the Air that like I hadn't consumed yet. And so I was like, at least I still have the novel to read. But last year I ended up reading it because I was like, oh, we're never gonna get the special episode, and then we ended up getting the special episode too. But I was like, I guess I'll finally read the novel. And I just remember like the second I started reading and like Yai and John met for the first time, I literally started crying. I was like, it took me back to all of my feelings of the show, like, and it made me realize how well the show did at capturing like the essence of the characters and the emotions of the characters and the emotionality of this story, and how long persevering it was, I guess, which kind of ties into like why I wish we could have seen season 2 or an extended season with Commander Yai and even with the modern day Yai, because I feel like getting those stories like really takes home the point of just how like deep Yai and Jom's love for each other is and how it is so expansive across so many timelines. And I think they did try and do that, where we saw like the little hints of Commander Yai and we saw him reunite with the modern day Yai at the end and realizing that Yai still remembered him. getting those second seasons or an additional season or even additional special episodes could have really like taken home like just how expansive that love is, because I think that's something that is so prevalent in the novel of like this love across multiple lifetimes and fighting to be together in multiple lifetimes. And I think the show did do a good job of that, but like there could have been more if we had gotten like the rest of their story. But yeah, I love that novel so much. I could endlessly talk about it. I feel you linger in the air, so I won't spend any longer on it. But yeah, it's the best that I've read in terms of beyond novel to series adaptations, without a doubt.
So another novel I read that I really loved was, of course, The Next Prince. This one's interesting because I do feel like there are a lot of things from the novel that I wish they would have put in the series, but I'm not like so upset about it that I don't like the series because of it. You know what I mean? Like, this is kind of one of those instances where I can see the novel and the series as two standalone things. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I had the same feelings, and I talked about that a lot in The Next Prince deep dive, that there were just certain plots in the novel that I think would have enhanced the series a lot more and made the storyline feel more connected. But I still like the series, and I think the production that The Next Prince came out to be was like a feat in and of itself for many different reasons, in terms of like monetary production and also the acting and the characters and things like that. So I definitely still liked the series, but I loved the novel. And the novel, like, you could tell that it was written with Xia and Anu in mind, which I think was the case that the author had discussed. Even when reading the novel, like, I could picture them so perfectly, and the characters, which I loved. Both volumes of that novel I really, really liked.
It was actually written with them in mind so closely that some of the things in the story/series are inspired by Xenonu moments. An example of this is the part whenever they're accidentally still wearing their mics, but they're having the little conversation like, do you care about me? It's okay to like admit that you care about me. That's pulled like directly from a Xenonu moment where they were like talking behind a door and like forgot that their mics were on. It is really interesting whenever an author is writing with specific people in mind, because that was also the case for Love Upon a Time. She was originally thinking of Nett and James. Another novel, I read Interminable. That's the Billy Babe one. I loved the series so much that I went and read the novel. So this is one of those instances where I kind of with I Feel You Linger in the Air, where I didn't want the series to end. So I was like, I need more of it. Something I really liked about the series is that they did not try to lighten the tone of the novel at all. They really went for it. And there were a lot of changes that they made for the series that I honestly thought were improvements, because I thought they made more sense. An example is in the novel, a lot of the people around Billy and Babe's characters are supportive of them. Like, they know that they're together and they're supportive of them. But in the series, they don't really have that same amount of support. Kauta, his mom, it's not that she doesn't support them, but she's very wary of it because she knows that there are like societal implications to her son being with this guy, first of all, but this guy who's of like a higher social class than them. And then there's also their I forget what his name. It's Master. Oh my gosh, I can't remember what his name is, but he's like their dance teacher. And he, in the series, doesn't know about them. Like, he doesn't know that they have a thing going on. But in the novel, he knows. And he, like, tries to play matchmaker for them. Weirdly enough, it's like the changes that they made for the series made it feel more sad, like more realistic, more sad. Yeah, you don't always see that. Like, a lot of the shows will try to lighten the mood. They'll try to stray from maybe darker themes from the novel, but this one really didn't. And then Bed Friend. Surprisingly, I didn't like this novel very much. I guess it just it didn't hit in the same way that the series did. I guess in the novel, there is a lot more focus on like the friend character. Like, there's a lot more banter with like them in the office and stuff like that I kind of just had to skim through, because I was like, I don't really care about this.
It's not what I'm here for.
I'm not here for that. Sorry. Honestly, the way that like the traumatic stuff was written was fine too, but I just think that the series was a huge improvement from the source material because I think it hooks you in more to see this story being told visually.
Yeah, I think sometimes like, and maybe it's not necessarily the writing, but also like, we're reading these novels translated to
Mm-hmm.
English, and I think having a good translator makes a big difference as well. I didn't specifically write notes about this, but I kind of feel this way with the novel For My Magic Prophecy. I think it was maybe just the way it was translated, or maybe it's just the way that the series told the story felt a lot more engaging to me, and I felt much more engaged in seeing the story play out on screen, because I think it was pretty faithful in terms of plot. But yeah, I found myself like there was a lot of the novel where I was just kind of like, okay, like we're skimming through, like I think I didn't even finish reading the special chapters technically, because I just like by the time I got to the end of the novel I was like, I feel fine being done with this story, but like I love the series and it was like one of my favorite shows from last year. So yeah, that's really interesting how that works out sometimes.
On things being translated well, I also want to throw Cutie Pie in here. Cutie Pie also
Mm.
has a lot of like comedic banter in the novel, but it translates really well, so it's really funny. Also, something that I thought was interesting about the Cutie Pie novel is that there is really like no conflict. The conflict lasts for like a chapter, but the series like
Yeah.
drags out the conflict the whole time.
Yeah, the conflict thing is interesting because I feel like, especially for the television medium, I love slice of life media. Like, I don't necessarily need a big overarching conflict. I'm a very character driven person. So if I like the characters, I can watch or read them doing the most mundane things. But that kind of makes me think of the one of the other ones I had notes with is Duong with You. And it is like very slice of life. Like the story is these two characters falling in love, like and learning to walk at a pace that allows them to fall in love with each other. And it's Duong's patience with Chin's feelings and Chin wanting to actively take steps to let Duong in. It's a very intimate novel, but it is like very simple and straightforward, and like the romance and them coming together is the plot. Obviously, at the time we're recording this, we're only 6 episodes into the show, so I don't really know what conflict they are going to introduce and to what level that is going to be to kind of expand the story to be able to fit 12 episodes. But it is another one where like there's small things, but it's like those kind of small mundane things that come up in a relationship, so you see them working through like these everyday conflicts together. And so it's going to be interesting to see that play out in the series and kind of what route they decide to take that in. But I love that novel. I loved how it was written, and I'm really liking the adaptation so far. I think I really am liking the way TT and Poor are bringing the characters to life, and kind of like keeping them true to the novel. But I think a lot of like the mannerisms and things like that the characters have also feel a lot like TT and Poor, which I really like as well. So far I'm really enjoying it as like a adaptation, but obviously it's not finished yet, so things could still go south. I don't think they will, just based on
Don't
the
say that.
trajectory so far, but you truly never know. So I'm not gonna feel 100% confident in that. So the other one that I had notes about where I felt like the show and the novel emphasized different things was Chemjira. I did not dislike the Chemjira novel, but I think the series connected me personally a lot more to the characters and their relationships than than the novel did. The Chemjira novel is not very romance heavy. Like the romance is the subplot in this novel. It's very plot driven. It's a lot about Chem's curse is the focus, and a lot of the novel is details about this curse and the things that Chem is experiencing and the rituals they're going through. And it was really cool to read, but I think the novel as it was written would not have translated well to screen. Like it would have been very, very detail heavy in a way that doesn't work for media. So I think the show making the choice to kind of bring the characters and their relationships to the forefront more, and make it a little bit more romantic just for the sake of it being a BL was the right choice. Obviously, I love that series. We've talked about it so much in our recent episodes. And I think just as someone who is very character driven, the series appealed more to me in that I felt more connected to the characters and the stakes that they were having in these relationships, feeling more connected with Chem and Piran's relationship, with Chem and Jet's relationship, even how Charn kind of played into things. And his relationship with Jet was very, very non-existent in the main novel. Like it mostly existed in the special novels that the author has released, which I think there's 3 of them at this point. So I think that's an example of one where the tone of the novel and the series feel different. I do think they kept a lot of the heart of the Kemjira novel, but adapted it in a way that makes the characters more of a forefront. And for me, that just worked a lot better than the novel did. But I still enjoyed the novel. I don't remember a lot of it because there's just so many details. And I'm like, I don't remember how I felt about the characters in the novel, but I remember so vividly how I feel about the characters in the show. So it just felt more impactful to me.
As Alexa mentioned, I did recruit some help from a correspondent for this next segment. Shar. I'm sure you guys have seen her
Shar.
lingering around. Shout out. I knew that she had read Keita Hatsukoi, which is My Love Mix-Up. This is what she said. I wrote this down almost word for word. So imagine this is her saying this. The Japanese adaptation really captures the vibe of the manga. And although they clearly swap certain things, like a ski trip for the Spartan camp, I still think it works. The adaptation came out while the manga was still being written and released, which is why they didn't kiss, because it hadn't happened in the manga yet. But she said she doesn't mind it because it felt appropriate for them as characters. And that really lines up with like what I've heard other people say about the series. Like, people really love the Japanese adaptation of My Love Mix-Up.
Yeah.
I haven't heard anyone say anything negative about it, to be honest.
No, I think that's like one of the most beloved like Japanese adaptations. Is Keita Hatsukoi is still like one of the ones that people love the most, I think.
And I guess with the My Love Mix-Up Thailand, she said, if they wanted to write a Gemini 4th series, then they should have just done that. It completely ignored important messages and themes from the original manga in a way that felt like they didn't understand the story. They wrote in extended singing scenes to replace Aoki dressing up as Cinderella, and they also got rid of the tutor who was homophobic in favor of a gay teacher. And on the surface, that might seem like a good change because it's like, yay, we don't have like a homophobe in this series or whatever. The tutor in the manga was kind of a reminder that people are still bigoted, like people are still homophobic. It was kind of like also emphasizing that like you should just be yourself despite what anyone else has to say or think about it. And it provided a moment for the stoic Ida to show his love for Aoki by standing up for him. I did not watch beyond one episode of the Thai adaptation, so I cannot speak to anything about that one.
Yeah, I know generally it's not super well liked. I did not watch it either. But that point that she made about like replacing the homophobic character in favor of someone who was gay, like she said, on the surface, it seems like the right move, but it almost kind of reminds me of that point of like sanitizing a story in a way that harms it, because there was a narrative that came with having a homophobic character and it served a point. So if you sanitize that because maybe it looks better to have a queer teacher on paper, then like it kind of takes away from the important point that story was making. So did not watch the adaptation. I had planned to because like that was their first project after My School President, and I was really like wanting to see what was next for Gemini and 4th at the time. But I remember like seeing people's opinions of it starting to come out and being like, maybe I'll pass and just stick with Keita Hatsukoi, the 2021 adaptation, which I love.
Like I said, I watched the first episode and it wasn't bad per se, but my issue with it was that a lot of the episode was just product placement and them advertising products, like even more than usual. Even more than usual. It was egregious.
You're probably getting all those big sponsors because Gemini and 4th were so fresh in their huge popularity at that time.
And then Semantic Error is another super popular one that had a series adaptation. I'm just going off of like what I remember people saying at the time. While the adaptation was airing, a lot of fans of the manhwa were talking about how closely the actors resemble the characters. So this is in like physical appearance, things with like their height and stuff like that. And it's also like their personality. So it seems like a lot of people were happy about the series adaptation, specifically people who are fans of the manhwa. Like I didn't see a lot of negativity towards it.
Not that I remember. I mean, God, that was what, like 4 or 5 years ago at this point that everyone loves that adaptation. Like, I don't know many people that have a bad thing to say about Semantic Error, the series. So I think that really speaks to, and it is another one that was it's a really, really popular manhwa. So I think that speaks to it capturing the audience of the source material as well as, you know, the adaptation audience as well. So Pixie loves it. It's still one of her favorites to this day. So I think that says a lot, because Pixie is like, because she's such an avid reader, I think she has like, is very critical of like her novel to series adaptations, and she's very like writing focused when she's watching novels and things like that, watching series for that reason. So the fact that it's one of her faves to this day, I think says a lot.
I also remember at the time fans were saying a lot of good things about how they depicted Jae-young's neurodivergence in the series. I remember that being a big conversation, and people just also thought that Sang-woo, like, they got his attitude down perfectly because he's a little cheeky. It seems like people thought that the series and the way that the actors portrayed the characters lined up really well with the manhwa. So I thought we could tell people where they can read these novels and webtoons. I think the big one, at least for the Thai novels, is Meb. So Meb, there is a desktop website, but I use the app. I think it's super easy to navigate on the app and like to purchase books. It will automatically translate everything to English. Like, I'm pretty sure you can like push a button.
You can set it to be in English. You can even set it to only show you novels that have English translations. There are like Spanish adaptations, and I think I've seen like some Chinese language translations on there as well. But a lot of people do recommend to buy your novels on the desktop version and then read it on the app version, just because like especially if you're using an iPhone, it's gonna charge you extra to buy it through the app because it takes the Apple fees or whatever. But sometimes I'm just lazy and I just buy everything in the app.
I
it's
just
not
buy it.
that much of a difference.
The thing that I have noticed, and I have actually complained to Alexa about this, is that they don't immediately take your money. They take it out like a couple days later. So you'll randomly get an Apple charge and be like, what the fuck is this? Another really popular one is Read a Write. And I don't know a lot about this site, but it seems like any novel that you can't find on Meb is probably on Read a Write. So like Two Worlds is on here.
From what I know, Read a Write is similar to like webtoon sites where you can read it in chapters and like you can pay a certain amount of money to read the novel in chapters versus like buying it on Meb. You're buying the entire novel as like a download, an EPUB or whatever you want to call it. But Read a Write is like a website where you go and read chapter by chapter. A lot of authors post novels to Read a Write as they're writing them, like as like weekly updates or whatever. So it's kind of similar to like webtoon in that way. I know there are novels, like there is English versions of the site, and there are novels that have, like I know Unknown Lover, the author was uploading English novels, English chapters to Read a Write before they released the whole novel on Meb. It's primarily a lot of like the Thai novels are on there in Thai, and that's like a platform for the authors to post them chapter by chapter.
I was trying to look something up and then I dropped my phone. I was like pretty sure that, you know how JJ has been writing his own BL novel?
I think that's on Read a Write.
I think he's using Read a Write, which is
because
so
you can
funny.
post it chapter.
I just love that JJ decided that he's gonna like take inspiration from him and Net and write a BL novel based on them. I think everyone knows Webtoon, Naver Webtoon. It's like the biggest Webtoon entity ever. Definitely the most popular site for manga and manhwa. And it is fully in English. Like, I mean, depending on your region, because I think it does translate into a couple different languages, but I know that it's in English.
There are also like sites that license a lot of Japanese manga, like Futekia is one that I can think of, which I actually don't know if it's still active. I think maybe a subset of it might have closed down, but there are a lot of sites that like get licenses specifically for like translations of Japanese manga. Futekia is the only one that's coming to mind right now, but there are a lot out there that like, you know, cater to different regions and stuff like that are similar to Webtoon in that way. The only one I have on here that's kind of tricky is I did put Wattpad And most uploads on Wattpad are unofficial translations, but there are instances where the fan translators will make an agreement with the author of the novel, and the author allows the fan translation if it hasn't been picked up by a publisher who's translating it. From the times I've seen it, like if it has an author's authorization, they usually will like start the fic with like a screenshot of like their written agreement with the author. And then if the novel does get an official translation, then like the Wattpad author has agreed to like take the novel down in that instance. So I can't think of one off the top of my head right now. That's very rare. I think 90% of the time, if you're looking at a translation on Wattpad, it is an illegal fan translation, so tread lightly there. But I did want to point it out because there are some that are authorized by the author on Wattpad as like fan translations that are okayed by the author. So
I do have an example. Bam Bam, that's where she originally had Cutie Pie. A fan translated it.
Maybe that's what I was thinking of.
That's where I originally started reading Cutie Pie, and that's why I recently decided to read it again, because I don't believe the person was able to even get through the whole story before it got its official release. Yeah. So it's kind of like...
I had Amazon, which obviously a lot of people avoid Amazon, which is very understandable, but you can purchase some ebooks on there. That's actually where I bought the I Feel You Linger in the Air novel back before Amazon was officially being boycotted. So I did have it like on my Kindle. Some people don't have a choice but to use Amazon, and I respect that. And then local bookstores, I have not really seen any BL novels in like my local bookstore, but there are local bookstores that have manga and manhwa section, and they often will have like a specific section for BL.
But yeah, Barnes & Noble, obviously not like a local bookstore, but they do have a lot more BL than before. Like, it's crazy. I've seen like Kinporsche in Barnes & Noble. My Love Mix-Up is there.
Kinporsche is a big one, yeah.
So if you do go to Barnes & Noble, like, you could probably find BL there. I wanted to throw this out there because there is another really big site that people use to read manhwa on, and it's called Lesin Comics. I highly, highly, highly recommend not using this site because they have had a lot of controversies throughout the years of not paying the artists. Back in the day, I was one of the people who read Killing Stalking. That's a throwback. People want to adapt that. I don't know if that should be adapted. Back in the day, I read that and I stopped reading it because there was a controversy where they weren't paying the author of Killing Stalking. And in addition to that, it is very expensive. It is a super expensive site because you have to constantly keep buying coins and coins and coins. But like every chapter costs so many coins. So I was spending a crazy amount of money just reading Killing Stalking every week. It was like not financially responsible at all. Obviously, like, I liked the story itself, so it felt like it was worth it in the moment. But looking back, I'm like, that was such a ripoff. This site is just like not good. I think it's just not good, and you should steer clear of it. But I also wanted to shout out the Danmei novels because there are so many now that are officially licensed in English through 7Seas Entertainment. The big one is the Heaven's Officials Blessing series. Another big one is Guardian. Another big one is the Husky and his white cat Shizun. And I just saw this because I went on their site, but they are working on Revenge Love right now. I looked at a list of all the Danmei that they currently have and the ones that are upcoming, and you will never run out of something to read if you want to get into that world. Truly, you won't. I thought it was very interesting that instead of like having a direct, like, I guess, purchase link or marketplace on their website, they link to an Amazon marketplace. I don't know, there might be other places too, but like, I'm just telling you, like, directly from their website, they linked to Amazon.
I remember 7Seas had been mentioned in our Discord recently. People were concerned because they got bought out by a company called Media Do, I think. And this company, I guess, is known for using AI for their translations. So a lot of people were concerned about what that means for 7Seas Entertainment. But they did make a statement on it, and they said they were going to expand on it further, that they said, as of right now, Seven Seas remains committed to human translators and high editorial standards for our readers. And the high editorial standards our readers and creators expect. Nothing about the acquisition changes how we translate our books. More info shortly. So as of right now, they are not planning to move towards AI translations, but the company that bought them, I guess, is infamously known for that. So keep an eye on it. You never know how these things will change over time. But yeah, as of right now, everything that they have so far is still translated by humans, and they say that that's their plan, but just putting that out there for people who might be concerned and what might change in the future. So
this has been a pretty long episode. I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to throw out there.
Read the I Feel You Linger in the Air novel. That's all I have to say. That's my final point.
Since you shouted out I Feel You Linger in the Air, and obviously I am in agreement with that, I support that, I'm going to tell people to read the Love Upon a Time novel in preparation for the series that is dropping on March 27th. Literally the best birthday gift ever. I guess that's it for today's episode. Let us know what series you think did a good or bad job adapting the source material. What BL novels have you really liked reading? I would also love to know that as well. If you have any recommendations for good ones,
Yes.
I mean, we're both still very much in our reading era right now. So if you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, and subscribe. And while you're at it, share the episode with your friends. It really helps us out. You can check out our Patreon for early access to episodes and reviews, as well as a lot of exclusive content, including, reminder, we are going to Thailand in June. So there will be a lot of exclusive content from that. That's all we have for you guys this week. And until next time, bye!
Bye-bye.